Neil is a wealthy playboy, excelling in drinking, womanizing, racing, and fighting. But after he started dating me, he quit everything. He dotes on me immensely. But he doesn't know that I've already seen his chat records. Really tired of playing with her, the same face for 7 years, I've been sick of it for a long time. The one I like now is you, my little canary. During the visit to the bridal shop, under the blazing sun, Neil took the umbrella from the nanny and held it over me himself. As a wealthy heir, he was always served by others. But after being with me, he started serving me instead. At first, his friends thought he was just trying a new fling with me. But after 7 years of being in love with me, he became more and more meticulous in his care for me every day. It shocked his friends. The staff who came to greet us spoke with a hint of envy. "Mr. Neil is really good to Sarah." Hearing this, Neil looked at me with a rewarding smile. But I only felt a slight ache in my heart. Ignoring his gaze, I went straight to the makeup room. Neil had ordered 15 of the latest wedding dresses and gowns, all personally selected based on my preferences. While I was doing makeup, he leaned on the doorframe, watching me with focused attention. One after another. I got a bit impatient towards the end, but he was still concentrating, even giving suggestions for modifications to the designers. All to achieve the most satisfactory effect. The staff surrounded me, their tone envious. Sarah, the gentleman who came for wedding dress trials, would start off attentive but lose patience later. Mr. Neil is the first I've seen who stays focused from start to end. Sarah, you are really lucky. Mr. Neil truly loves you. Love me? I turned to look at Neil not far away, and at the moment our eyes met, he gave a soft, tender smile. A stark contrast to the cold and aloof Neil portrayed in the media. This was his special affection for me. But if he truly loved me, why would he secretly keep another woman in a villa in the suburbs? He called her, my little canary. Such an intimate and ambiguous nickname. Oh, too. Everyone in Beijing's high society knew Neil loved me. Before being with me, he was adept at clubbing, drinking, womanizing, and fighting. But since being in love with me, he quit all of that. Just because I said, I don't like the smell of alcohol, he stopped frequenting bars and even abstained from drinking at social gatherings. He would consult me before socializing with friends and avoided other women as much as possible. All to avoid upsetting me. At one party, a rich young lady who liked him mocked me, and he immediately cold-faced her out, and since then, I never saw her again. Later, I learned that Neil had banished the young lady and her family from the capital. For this, Neil sought help from his father, agreeing to give up his frivolous lifestyle to study business management, to eventually take over the He family business. Something he had never wanted to do. But for me, he embraced it willingly. Then, everyone finally realized. Neil wasn't just playing around with me. He needed me. No wonder his friends thought so. After all, he was a wealthy heir, and I was just a news anchor. In terms of status and class, we were worlds apart. I was also afraid of his parents' attitude, but when I first went to his house, Neil's mother spoke warmly and kindly. Neil told me he's chosen you for life. No one else matters, no matter how good they are. He even warned me not to make it hard for you, or he'd never come back. Sarah, I should thank you. If it weren't for you, who knows how long it would have taken Neil to get on the right track. I felt both shy and moved. Moved by everything Neil had done for me. That night, he held me in his arms and kissed my forehead, his voice low and tender. Sarah, I love you. I hugged him tightly, thinking I had grasped a ray of light in my life. But in just a short 7 years, this man who professed his love for me spoke of me to another woman with such disdain. Tired of being with her for 7 years, really got bored. If it weren't for my mom liking her, I would have broken up with her long ago. But she loves me so much, she would go crazy if I broke up with her. Haha. My favorite now is you, my little canary. After choosing the wedding dress and suits, it had gotten dark. Neil drove me home. He made me a cup of brown sugar water to warm my stomach. His words in the living room seemed a bit hazy. "Sarah, I have to go back to the office to deal with today's meeting. It might get late. You should sleep first. No need to wait for me." I gently caught his sleeve. "Can you not go?" He paused, and I noticed him fiddling with his left hand, a small gesture he made when thinking. But in the end, he shook his head and softly said, "This meeting is very important. I must go back." I looked at him for a long time, trying to see if there was even a hint of guilt. But there was none. "Sarah, after I'm done, I'll come back to you first thing, okay?" He held me in his arms, gently comforting me. I hid the sourness in my eyes, letting the tears fall silently. "Okay, go ahead." He comforted me for a long time, kissed my cheek before leaving, which I dodged. He thought I was just being moody, and left with a helpless yet indulgent smile. Then he turned and left without hesitation. I watched him go, and after a moment, I picked up the car keys and followed him. The destination was a villa in the suburbs of Beijing. I hid around the corner, watching him enter the password, and a woman threw herself into his arms. The woman was dressed in a black silk bunny-maid outfit, her tone soft and seductive. "Master, you're finally here." Neil lowered his head to kiss her, then hurriedly picked her up and entered the villa. That night, I stood outside the villa for a long time. Until I was completely cold, then I turned and left. In fact, I wasn't surprised by Neil's plans for tonight. His chat records with his little canary started 3 years ago. "Neil, thanks for driving me home. I even got to sit in a CEO's car." "No problem." Ending yesterday, "Little bird, tomorrow I'll go with her to pick wedding dresses, and at night I'll come to you, wear this and wait for me." "Got it, Master Tilda." The picture was of a woman in a black silk bunny-maid outfit kneeling. I just had one last hope for Neil. Hoping he would stay because of my plea. But he didn't. Not even a trace of guilt. When Neil got home, I was sitting on the sofa, lost in thought. Not waiting for him. Just feeling blocked up, unable to sleep. He walked into the house quietly, afraid of waking me up. But when he turned, he saw me staring at him unblinkingly. He was startled, and seeing my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes, he felt extremely pained. "Sarah, why haven't you slept? Didn't I tell you not to wait for me?" He took my hand and noticed how cold my fingertips were, his expression showing a hint of anger. "Sarah, why don't you listen? Your hands are so cold, and you didn't even turn on the heater. Do you want to make me worry sick?" It was rare for him to scold me. And it was all out of concern for my health. At that moment, my heart felt as if it was choked by a wave of resentment. Unable to rise or fall. Especially with the scent of perfume on him that couldn't be dispersed. It made me involuntarily recall his actions today and the coquettish laughter of that woman. Like a hammer smashing down on my heart over and over again. Suddenly, I didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. I was the one hurt, the one betrayed. Why should I bear it? I looked up at him and cut him off. "Neil, I've seen it. Your chat records with her." Actually, that day, I didn't mean to snoop through Neil's phone. We had been in love for 7 years, I trusted his love for me, and I was willing to trust him. But that night, I suddenly woke up for no reason. Neil was sound asleep after working late, and I saw his phone blinking. Worried it was something work-related, I opened it and saw, "Boss, were you satisfied with last night's service?" Followed by several extremely explicit photos. I was so scared that my hand trembled, and my mind went blank. My first reaction was disbelief. Disbelief that Neil would betray me. But trembling, I scrolled up through the chat history, page by page, line by line. It took me over an hour to reach the beginning. It was 3 years ago. "Boss, thank you for driving me home. I finally got to experience sitting in the boss's passenger seat. And, thank you for having dinner at my place." It was on March 25th, at 9:10 p.m. I remember, it was my birthday. But Neil was late. He made me wait at home for 3 hours. He said it was because of company affairs and apologized repeatedly. Of course, I didn't blame him, I even comforted and pitied him. Now I know. That day, he was dropping a female colleague home and even stayed at her place for dinner. That's why he was delayed. I bet the atmosphere was excellent then. So good that it made Neil forget I was waiting at home for him on my birthday. Forget all his promises to me. Choosing to accompany another woman. From that day on, Tracy was assigned to his side, becoming his personal assistant. Even if they were together day and night. Their online chats never stopped. From initially discussing work issues, gradually involving personal life matters, and eventually evolving into intimate exchanges. Neil would drop her home before picking me up from work. He helped her with trivial work matters, and even fired a male superior who targeted her. When picking gifts for me, he also got something for Tracy. Tracy merely complained a bit about wasting time commuting, and Neil bought her a house near the company. Tracy was overjoyed and offered to thank Neil. Then they had their first encounter. "Boss, I'm waiting for you here." "Okay." The location was a hotel not far from our home. What was I doing at that time? I tried to recall. I remember. I was packing Neil's luggage. He told me he had a business trip. But he didn't come back, so I called him. Neil told me he would be home soon. His voice was a bit breathless. Probably busy with Tracy in bed at that time. And I was completely oblivious. I was really foolish. That night, I forgot how long I sat there, how many times I went back and forth through the chat history. In the end, I replied to Tracy with 3 words, "Very satisfied." Then I withdrew the message. Pretending like nothing ever happened. But I knew Tracy saw it. And she must have guessed it was me who sent it. That's why she deliberately sent me their date time. I went. I saw with my own eyes how this man, who repeatedly said he loved me, was so eager in the face of another woman's temptation. Back to the present, in the dimly lit living room, the light fell on Neil's face. Showing the confusion in his eyes. "Sarah, what chat records?" I patiently explained, 7 years, I'm really tired of it. I like you. If I break up with her, she will definitely go crazy. With each sentence, his face grew paler. Until the end, he gripped my wrist tightly, trembling non-stop, begging me, "Sarah, stop talking." I looked down at him, tears uncontrollably falling. "Neil, did you ever think of me when you were with her? If you were really tired of me, you could have just told me, would I have clung to you? We've been together for 7 years, we were about to get married, why do you treat me like this? Why keep deceiving me? You've been lying to me for 3 years. My questions, my hysterical crying, couldn't compare to even a fraction of the pain in my heart. It felt like my heart was being roasted on a fire. It hurt. It really hurt too much. In fact, the moment I saw the chat records, those explicit photos, even when I saw them intimately entwined, I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. I didn't even know why I should cry. But now, seeing Neil caring for me. I know him. Neil's love for me is real. And because it's real, it makes me even more disgusted. Continuing with the translation. My crying echoed in the living room, over and over again. Neil panically embraced me, his voice low and trembling. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I was out of my mind. I swear I only love you, it was just a game with her, I was wrong. Okay?" In the past, whenever he did something wrong, he would look so pitiable, and I would always soften. But not this time. I slowly but firmly pushed him away. "Neil, it's over between us." His eyes instantly reddened, as if he was about to cry. "Sarah, I don't agree." "Neil, don't touch me, you're too dirty." My words turned Neil's face pale as paper, and he unconsciously withdrew his hand. I looked at him for a long time, then suddenly smiled. "Here, take this back. Give it to your little canary. I don't need it anymore." I took off the engagement ring and placed it in his palm. My fingertips were icy cold. He instinctively tried to grasp it but caught nothing. I got up, went to the bedroom, picked up my already packed luggage, and walked towards the door without looking back. Suddenly, Neil's hurried footsteps followed, stopping half a meter behind me. His deep voice was hoarse. "Sarah, can't you forgive me this one time?" I paused in my steps but didn't turn around. "Neil, goodbye." After leaving, I returned to my own house. My father passed away unexpectedly, and when I was 10, my mother remarried and had my little sister, who is now 17 years old. This house was left by my father, and my mother transferred it to my name after I became an adult. My mother, of course, loves me, but she loves my little sister more. It's only natural, I understand. I've always been reluctant to disturb her new life. My relationship with her was neither close nor distant. Breaking up with Neil and calling off the engagement was a big deal. I had arranged a time to tell her a few days later. When closing the door, I accidentally broke a clay figure on the cabinet. I glanced at it and then closed the door. I explained the reason for the breakup without hiding anything. She was silent for a long time before saying, "Sarah, you've been with him for 7 years, turning him from a wastrel into the Neil of today. Are you willing to let go and let him be with another woman?" I was stunned for a moment. She continued, "You now have something over him. He surely won't dare to make a mistake again. Even if he does, you can use this to maximize your benefits. Besides, Neil hasn't mentioned breaking up. Maybe he really has you in his heart, and that woman was just a fling. There's still a chance to turn things around since your breakup isn't public yet." She analyzed my situation so calmly, like a robot or a smart computer, but not like a mother. I looked at her and suddenly asked, "Mom, if my sister's boyfriend cheated, would you advise her the same? To endure betrayal and pursue maximum benefits?" "Of course, I would never." She stopped mid-sentence, her face suddenly darkening, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Sarah, I didn't mean that, I know. I know she doesn't mean to harm me. She just doesn't love me as much." My crying echoed in the living room, again and again. Neil hastily pulled me into his arms, his voice deep and trembling. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I was deluded, I swear I only love you, it was just a fling with her, I was wrong, okay?" In the past, whenever he did something wrong, he would appear so pitiful, and I would always soften. But this time, I won't. I slowly yet firmly pushed him away. "Neil, we're done." His eyes instantly reddened, as if he was about to burst into tears. "Sarah, I don't agree." "Neil, don't touch me, you're too dirty." My words turned Neil's face as white as paper, and he unconsciously released his grip. I looked at him for a long time, then suddenly smiled. "Here, take this back. Give it to your little canary. Anyway, I don't need it anymore." I took off the engagement ring and placed it in his hand. My fingertips were ice cold. He instinctively tried to hold it but caught nothing. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, picked up my already packed luggage, and headed for the door without looking back. Suddenly, Neil's frantic footsteps followed but stopped half a meter away from me. His deep voice was hoarse. "Sarah, can't you really forgive me this one time?" I paused but didn't turn back. "Neil, goodbye." After leaving, I returned to my own house. My father had passed away unexpectedly, and when I was 10, my mother remarried and had my little sister, who is now 17. This house was left by my father, and my mother transferred it to me after I became an adult. My mother loves me, of course, but she loves my little sister more. It's human nature, and I understand. I've always been reluctant to disturb her new life. My relationship with her was neither close nor distant. Breaking up with Neil and calling off the engagement was a significant matter. I had arranged a time to tell her a few days later. When I closed the door, I accidentally broke a clay figure on the cabinet. I glanced at it, then closed the door. I explained the reason for the breakup without hiding anything. She was silent for a long time before saying, "Sarah, you've been with him for 7 years, turning him from a wastrel into the Neil of today. Are you willing to just let go and let him be with another woman?" I was stunned for a moment. She continued, "You now have leverage over him. He surely won't dare to make a mistake again. Even if he does, you can use this to maximize your own interests. Besides, Neil hasn't mentioned breaking up. Maybe he really has you in his heart, and that woman was just a fling. There's still a chance to turn things around since your breakup isn't public yet. She analyzed my situation so calmly, like a robot or a smart computer, but not like a mother. I looked at her and suddenly asked, "Mom, if my sister's boyfriend cheated, would you advise her the same? To endure the betrayal and pursue maximum benefits?" "Of course not." She stopped mid-sentence, her face suddenly darkening, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Sarah, I didn't mean that, I know. I know she doesn't mean to harm me. She just doesn't love me as much. Because of the lack of love, she could be so calm. If it were my sister, she would probably have been furious by now. I should have realized this long ago. But it still felt a bit sour in my heart." I gave a faint smile. "Mom, I understand." Before leaving, she looked at my haggard appearance, a hint of pity in her brow. "Sarah, take care of yourself." I hadn't even replied when a delicate girl's voice suddenly sounded from inside. "Mom, I'm hungry." My mother's face lit up with a smile. She closed the door and went back inside. "Little princess, the food is already ready." Her tone was extremely tender. During this time, she didn't even glance at me. I blinked my dry eyes and turned to leave. Back home, the clay figure lay quietly on the ground, shattered. I picked up a piece. On it was inscribed, "Neil loves only Sarah." This was a gift he gave me on our first date. It was Children's Day, and Neil was in a pottery shop with a bunch of kids, looking awkward and cute. He even got recognized and photographed. At that time, his reputation wasn't good, changing girlfriends as frequently as clothes. I was also labeled as Neil's plaything. I didn't really care. But he did. He immediately contacted the media to delete the video, and personally registered a Weibo account to make our relationship public. "Sarah is my wife. I am her plaything." It caused a stir online. I found him, telling him he didn't have to belittle himself for my sake. I didn't care about the rumors. "Sarah, this is how I really feel. I can't even bear to let you get hurt, let alone others. I want you to always stand clean in front of the media. I won't allow anyone to tarnish your skirt." I still remember his expression at that moment. Focused, serious, and affectionate. Even now, amidst this mess, I can't deny that at that moment, he really did love me. Later, when I went to the mountains for an interview, I encountered a landslide. I was buried for a day and a night. When I woke up again, I was in the hospital. Neil was by my side. Seeing me awake, he calmly called the doctor to check on me. I was surrounded by doctors. Seeing him standing far away, I felt wronged and scared, and called out to him, "Neil." Just at that call, he unexpectedly burst into tears. Holding my hand, kissing it over and over. His tears fell on the back of my hand, scalding hot. "Sarah, you scared me to death." During my hospitalization, he took meticulous care of me. After being discharged, he left his work and followed me every step. His secretary even called me. "Neil, you don't need to be so nervous about me. I'm really fine. I'll be more careful in the future. Go back to work with peace of mind. Neil, I'm not a child anymore. I can take care of myself." I comforted him for a long time, even got a bit angry, before he agreed to work. I thought that would be the end of it. But I woke up in the middle of the night and found Neil on the balcony making a phone call. "Mom, when Sarah was rescued, she was covered in blood, and my heart almost broke. I dare not sleep. I'm afraid she'll disappear. Mom, I'm really scared of losing her." His voice trembled uncontrollably, hoarse and choked with emotion. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just overly anxious. He just cared about me too much. And I had been harsh to him. I went up to him and hugged him, crying uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, really sorry." He hung up the phone and held me tightly, his eyes red. That night, we clung to each other tightly, intertwined without any gap. At that time, I truly thought someone in this world could love me so deeply. But how quickly everything changed. My mom asked if I was content. I wasn't. But like this clay figure, it's already broken. Even if I'm unwilling, it's something that needs to be discarded. When my leave ended, I returned to work at the TV station. As soon as I reached the office, I saw bunches and bunches of red roses on my desk. 7 days of leave equaled 7 bouquets of fresh flowers, vibrant and passionate. Be happy every day. There was no name, but everyone knew who sent them. Sarah, I'm so envious of you. You've been dating for 7 years, and Neil is still like in the honeymoon phase, sending flowers every day. I heard you two are getting engaged soon. Don't forget us when the good news comes. My colleagues joked around, and normally I would have just blushed and smiled. But now, it felt ironic. What honeymoon phase? Neil was tired of me long ago. But he used these little tricks to fool me for 7 years, playing me for a fool. I picked up the roses and threw them into the trash bin in front of everyone. Turning to the surprised or astonished expressions of my colleagues, I said word by word, "We're not getting married, I broke up with Neil." As my words fell, the entire studio went silent. Everyone looked at each other in disbelief. And then, a figure walked in. It was Neil. His eyes were filled with deep and complex emotions. In contrast, Tracy behind him was undisguised in her triumph and joy. Perhaps thinking she finally got rid of me, or maybe thinking she could take my place. I didn't care. My gaze fell on Neil, my smile gentle. "Neil, you agree with what I said, right?" He silently looked at me, and I held his gaze. After a long while, his eyes reddened, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, I don't agree. I don't agree with breaking up." Tracy's face turned pale in an instant, incredulously staring at Neil. But she received no response from Neil, only able to anxiously look towards me, fearing that I wouldn't leave Neil. I spoke indifferently. "Neil, you know I never turn back once I've made a decision. Once I say it's over, it won't start again." Neil came to the TV station for an interview. I was usually the one to conduct interviews with guests, but the station manager, who was also my college professor, wanted to replace me after knowing about my breakup with Neil. I refused. "Don't worry, teacher, my personal feelings won't affect my work." I lived up to my words. The entire interview went smoothly and naturally, except that Neil kept unconsciously staring at me. This, however, was interpreted by the media as us being affectionate on public expense. "Neil is too cute," he kept looking at his wife throughout the interview. Remember the last interview, Neil couldn't help but act spoiled. Neil and Sarah should be getting engaged, right? Neil loves her so much. The wedding will surely be sensational. Heard Neil personally selected the wedding dress and jewelry, must be worth a fortune. It had been half a month since I broke up with Neil. Hardly anyone knew. I didn't want my private life to be the subject of gossip, but I also didn't want to be misunderstood. I thought about it and posted a Weibo. "Neil and I have broken up, and the engagement is off. Thank you all for your blessings. Wishing for what's desired, returning freedom to oneself." Less than half a minute after I posted it, the internet exploded. Then I received a WeChat message. It was from Neil. He said, "My only wish is to be with you forever." Above that, were all his apologies and regrets, one after another. I never replied to any of them. I read them all and then added him to the blacklist. Such lies, I will not believe again. With my Weibo post, almost everyone around me knew about my breakup. The colleagues at the TV station were okay. We don't have the habit of prying into each other's privacy. During a meal with my teacher, she suddenly asked, "Did Neil cheat?" I paused and didn't speak. She sighed and suddenly smiled. "Actually, it's good that you and Neil broke up." I was stunned. After all, these past few days, the most common advice I received was to reconcile with Neil. A good romantic relationship should involve mutual progress. Neil has transformed, but what about you? You were my best student, but after working for 7 years, you are still just a news anchor. Some of your peers, who weren't even as good as you, have become the pillars of the station. Sarah, you're trapped in Neil's love. The teacher has known me for 14 years, both as a mentor and a friend. Apart from Neil, she knows and cares about me the most. I know if things between me and Neil had continued well, she would never have said this to me. She wants me to be truly well. Whatever that well-being may be, she can accept it. In front of her, I don't need to pretend to be strong. So, I cried uncontrollably. Teacher, he has another woman. He told her that our engagement was only for his mother's sake, that he was tired of playing with me. We were together for 7 years, but he's been with that woman for 3 years. I was played like a fool. She hugged me, her voice as gentle as when she found me crying in secret in college after being bullied. Why cry, silly girl? You're free now. Yes, I'm free. I no longer need to reject promotions to avoid rumors that Neil is favoring me. I don't need to turn down opportunities to study abroad to stay by Neil's side. From now on, I am Sarah, not just Neil's envied girlfriend. My eyes were sparkling with tears, but a radiant smile appeared on my face. Right, I'm free. I blocked Neil on all forms of contact, and sent back all the gifts he gave me to his company. He's always been proud, and after being rebuffed repeatedly, he probably lost interest. He stopped bothering me. I focused all my attention on work, and my teacher arranged for me to go abroad for a seminar, which would also be a chance to relax. I agreed. After handing over my work, I returned home late. From a distance, I saw a figure standing downstairs. Tall and upright. I recognized him at a glance. He hadn't noticed me and was on a phone call, his voice deep and impatient with a hint of aggression. I've already paid you to leave, don't you understand? If you're pregnant, get rid of it. I won't want the child you give birth to. His voice halted the moment he saw me. He ended the call and walked towards me. Sarah, you're back. Is the TV station busy? Why are you coming back so late? You're a light sleeper and need more sleep. I glanced at him. Neil, that's my business. I walked past him, intending to go straight upstairs to my home. Sarah, wait a moment. Neil grabbed my wrist, but the next second, I forcefully shook off his hand, my gaze icy and piercing. Don't touch me. Dirty. This sharpness was something Neil had never seen before. Startled, he let go of my hand but, fearing I would leave, blocked my way and handed me a medical kit, his tone anxious. Sarah, I heard you're going abroad. The climate there is dry and harsh, and your skin is prone to allergies. I've prepared allergy medicine for you. Take it with you, it'll be convenient if you get an allergic reaction. He was humbled, pitiful, and vulnerable. His handsome face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his tone gentle, even pleading. A stark contrast to his indifference and disdain while on the phone. Was he trying to appease me? I looked at him, but hesitated to take what he was offering. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Neil's eyes gradually reddened, his lips pursed in distress. How ironic it is. The person who betrayed me was him, and yet now, the one seeking my pity and trying to please me is also him. In the end, I still didn't accept his gesture of goodwill. I spoke softly but firmly, Neil, don't look for me anymore. Not hating you is already my limit. Half a month after going abroad, I received an email. It was a pregnancy test report, along with several photos. Tracy was lying on the bed, her face flushed, surrounded by red silk, and Neil lay quietly beside her. I'm carrying Neil's child. He's been with me for 3 years. He told me you're a dead fish in bed, boring, and that he loves me. We're going to get engaged, married. Since you've left, don't come back and disturb us. Every word was a declaration of her claim, flaunting Neil's preference for her, but her insecurity was blatantly obvious. I thought, so, that day Neil was telling Tracy to abort the child on the phone. Quite amusing. Neil was so heartless, and yet Tracy still dreamt of climbing the social ladder through the child. I pondered, then printed out the email exactly as it was and mailed it to Neil's company. I also sent a congratulatory message. Congratulations to Neil on becoming a father. During the seminar abroad, I interacted with internationally renowned hosts and learned a lot. Upon returning home, I applied these experiences to my work and soon received a promotion opportunity. My teacher called me into her office, smiling, "You've always been outstanding. Actually, you should have had this position 3 years ago, but you refused it then. Will you refuse again now?" 3 years ago, I was so afraid that Neil would be accused of unjust favoritism that I instantly rejected the promotion, feeling that I had let down my own efforts and my teacher's expectations, even secretly crying about it. But at that time, Neil was betraying me with Tracy. Thinking back, it seems so foolish. I smiled lightly, my eyes sparkling with determination. Not anymore. I won't refuse such opportunities again. After the promotion, my work became busier. So busy that when I saw Neil again, I realized it had been almost a year since we last met. And in this past year, I hadn't thought of him even once. I could even smile and nod at him. I remember hating him so much right after the breakup, but now, it seems like a passing cloud. Insignificant. When Neil stopped me as we passed each other, "Sarah, can we talk?" Seeing his insistent gaze and the busy surroundings, I agreed. We went to a nearby cafe, the aroma of coffee beans lingering in the air. Subtle, but pleasant. Neil was silent for a long time, just looking at me. I took a sip of my coffee calmly. "I heard you were going to get engaged to Tracy. How's that going?" "It's cancelled." He clenched his fists tightly, a mix of anger and helplessness. "The child she was carrying wasn't mine." I looked up at him and noticed how haggard he looked today. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, a total picture of dejection. I chuckled lightly, "That's what I'd call poetic justice." He paused, then looked up at me. It seemed he didn't expect me to kick him when he was down, but I did. I looked at him calmly, my words dripping with cold irony. A betrayer betrayed. That's only fair. That day, Neil was probably wounded by my sharpness and eventually fled in defeat. Although I didn't see him, I heard about him from time to time. After all, as a wealthy heir, many eyes were on him. As media professionals, we were often the first to know about such developments, especially considering my past with him. "Sarah, I have big news for you." Neil's new fiancée Tracy made a scene at Neil's mother's birthday party. She claimed the Neil family looked down on her, that Neil forced himself on her and then pressured her to abort their child. Many influential people were there, and those who disliked the Neil family immediately capitalized on this scandal, dredging up Neil's past misdemeanors, like drinking and fighting, attending certain parties. Whether true or false, it certainly cost the Neil family quite a bit of business. Their stocks have dropped recently. Drinking and fighting. That was true, as Neil was indeed hot-tempered back then. But attending certain parties, that's when I suddenly remembered the black silk bunny maid outfit, and the bold, flamboyant private photos Tracy had sent. I understood everything. So, Neil liked that type. And I, obviously, was not into that. No wonder he had an affair with Tracy for so many years. Aside from seeking thrills, Tracy probably satisfied his perverse desires. But all this had nothing to do with me anymore. I sighed, my eyes filled with amusement. That's really, really tragic. 2 years later, I was promoted again. My teacher retired, and I took over her position, becoming the youngest station manager. My abilities and achievements left no one questioning my suitability for the role. As for Neil, I saw him again during an interview, but I was no longer the host. Since Tracy's outburst, the Neil family had been in constant turmoil, leaving him no energy to entangle with me. The next time I heard about him, it was because he had been sent to prison. After Tracy was forcibly made to abort by Neil, she allied with Neil's rivals, first causing trouble at the company, leading to staff resignations, and then at Neil's family home, harassing Neil's mother to the point of nervous breakdown. They reported to the police, but Tracy, being mentally unstable, was let go. Later, in a confrontation with Neil, he impulsively hit her with his car. Tracy is now in a vegetative state, with little chance of waking up. I was shocked to hear this, but not surprised. Neil had always been like that. Impulsive, hot-tempered, easily angered. It was only when he was with me that he suppressed his true nature.